Whew. Thank you very much, everyone. My name is Aaron, and
I'm Ness. I'm Dan.
and together we make up the Living Classroom. And what the Living Classroom does is we teach permaculture to kids in schools, because sometimes I see kids as the seedlings, and we need to bring them up to be almost in like a little greenhouse and create a beautiful permaculture pathway to get kids as young as 5 years old up to 18 years old, understanding permaculture, understanding the core principles and ethics, and they can go out there into the world and make really ethical and, bring out the moral compass of permaculture out in whatever occupation they choose. So the first slide, thanks Wayne. When people ask, what do we do? Well, obviously we teach permaculture to kids in schools, and for those who don't know what permaculture is, it's a mix of two words, perma and agriculture, so you get permanent agriculture. We're creating a closed loop of minerals and energy to be able to teach kids about being self-sustainable in schools and what type of solutions they can enact to have a positive change on the environment today. And so some of the things that we do is we will go into a school and we'll teach them how to design their very own permaculture garden. And they're part of that, and they talk about the needs of the school, the needs of the stakeholders, the needs of the teachers, the needs of the principal as well, and the general community to come up with a beautiful design that they create. And Dan will talk about some of the designs in a little bit. And not only that, once they've designed it, they go into the build phase. So we find that it's really important for kids to be invested in the creation of that garden, rather than just coming home, coming to school after the school holidays and finding that there's a garden that's been built there. They're less likely to treat it with respect as opposed to something they've built themselves. They've put that hard work in. They actually go on to protect that garden and look after it into the foreseeable future. Then they plant those plants, and we teach them how to do companion planting, and then they harvest, and then we've got our cooking phase, which Vanessa Schofield here, our amazing whole food cook, teaches them beautiful recipes to be able to take those recipes home and cook nutritious and delicious vegetables and meals when they get home. And the beautiful thing about that is to make it a permaculture system, they compost those food scraps, learn about waste, learn about the ecosystem and the biodiversity in the soil to start that loop over and over again. And they'll reassess their garden and then continue it on. And the next slide. This one's got some videos in it as well. This is about our focus. So our focus is 6 main topics here, and one of them is the most important. That's kids teaching kids. Dan will talk about our garden ambassadoring program. That's extremely important to have in a school garden, is to bring up a generation of ambassadors that are going to look after that program. Then we building capacity, so teaching kids real-world life skills and practical applications of those skills, so when they go out into the big bad world, they're actually prepared for it. As we'll find out later, that there's some of the kids aren't going into that workforce feeling prepared. Then we engage the curriculum, so we're trying to learn all the subjects of the curriculum around the garden. Using permaculture principles, as I mentioned before, coming across as a solutions-based approach, teaching kids solutions and how they can enact those solutions at home, at their school, in their communities. And then finally, connecting with community. It's a beautiful day today that we're partnered with Permaculture Noosa, and we feel very, very privileged that that's a beautiful partnership that we'll be able to take into the future and open up a lot of opportunities. And it's about teaching kids to connect with communities as well. So a little bit about the history. Dan's going to go into the history of the program.
Thanks, everyone. 16 years ago it started, but we do need to turn the clocks back just a little bit more. So the program started in 2003, but actually, unbeknown to us, it started in 1993. And at the time, myself and others were, this is an image here of where it started, Port Kembla in the Illawarra, New South Wales, Port Kembla Steelworks. So I'm from there, and during the early 90s, so around 1993, this project had its seed sown as a land care project. Myself and others were working in environmental restoration on a wetland that had been a remnant left over from the Port Kembla Steelworks, which originally covered something like 250 hectares, this wetlands. So this remnant of wetlands attracted a bunch of people who were concerned about the natural environment and also interested in community. In the process, what happened was we ended up having to extend the olive branch, I guess, to people who are working within the steelworks. At the time, it was BHP, so it wasn't very a great. They didn't have a great reputation, both in the area, in the Illawarra, but also around the world. But for us to move forward, we needed to build a partnership with people who were doing good in that organisation. 10 years on, those relationships had been built across the community, both within industry, within the residents who are living in the area, with schools who had been involved with the program, local businesses, other businesses, local government and non-government organisations. So 10 years on, in 2003, people who were working in the steelworks gave us a call and said that there's people in the organisation who were wanting to do some good, wanted to do good in terms of addressing some of the impacts that heavy industry had on the local community and the environment. And Cringilla Primary School was a classic case of a school that most of the students were not from non-English speaking backgrounds, a disadvantaged school, and the school was built at the edge of industrial landfill sites. So the steelworks had been dumping slag and coal wash in the valleys around Port Kembla and Cringilla, and as a consequence, the physical environment was incredibly damaged. The spirit of people had been beaten down, and the environmental health issues were quite high. So there were lots of great people within the organisation who wanted to address that. So in 2003, we were invited, as by this stage, myself and Aaron Sorensen, who was in the earlier slides there, were practicing permaculturalists and community garden activists. And so we got the call to what would we do if some funding was directed towards Cringilla School, and our response was, well, we'd build a living classroom, and what that would look like would be that we'd ask the school what it wanted, what it needed. We would help them build that, and then most importantly, we would train the students and as ambassadors so that they could, so there was no burden on the teachers. We wanted the children to be able to know all of the practices that would enable the school to adopt the program that's not going to burden the parents and the teachers. So the Living Classroom was born then in 2003, and here, in the most unlikely of places, a very industrialised town in Australia. And there's an image there of, in fact, the school is still on fire. The ground is still, has combusted some 50 metres underground, where there's still residues of coal and that has been burning for many decades. However, despite that, a flourishing garden has evolved over the last 16 years. So from that initial seed, the program spread to the Warrawong community of schools, where the high school saw the importance of promoting themselves as a school that uses permaculture as part of their education program, and they formed a partnership, the Permaculture Partnership, and that word that keeps coming up. None of this we wouldn't be standing here today if it was Dan and Aaron from down there and a few bunch of other people. It was very much a partnership model. So we branched out from primary schools into from primary schools into high schools, formed a partnership amongst the community of schools, so that kids going to a primary school in the area could end up in a high school that might be teaching permaculture, which is what's happened. So here's an example of some of the students in 2009 at the top of the slide there, who were designing the first high school garden at Warrawong High. Some of these students were ambassadors in the primary school program, and then had gone to high school, got to design their own garden, then other kids could learn in it as well as them. And then in 2017 we worked with Albion Park High School, another high school in the Illawarra, where again, same process, student engagement in the high school, in high school in terms of visioning, planning, designing, building, and then being part of a training program in the high school. So what we do is this combination of things, but ultimately it's about the young people, and it's about the training program. It's about also it's about working together, much like Permaculture. Noosa here, the success that I can see in this organisation goes back many years, and is also based on who's here now and who's showing up and how people work together. So I guess we feel excited about being here because we're amongst people who are interested in working together. So these are some of the examples of the gardens. They're all different, but they're the same. They have the same elements. They all exactly the same elements. There's somewhere to grow food, somewhere to manage organic waste, somewhere to establish a food forest, somewhere to cook food, somewhere to teach for kids to gather. So after 16 years, we feel like we've made enough mistakes to know what doesn't work and what works really well, and so now it's about repeating success. The Cringilla School in the bottom left-hand corner is this here. So in the background are the Berkeley Hills. Down behind that is where all of the landfill is. This is at the edge of that.
That's what they look like before.
Yeah.
Yeah, not one we've done.
Yeah. So that's 2003 at Cringilla School, and to the right we're at 2009, our 10, with Warrawong High School. And so, some years on the left there we have Cringilla School, which is radically transformed, and it has what we originally envisaged was not just a garden, but it's a living classroom, which included a really fundamental part of it, which is the outdoor kitchen. So right at the beginning we realised, we need somewhere to cook as well as garden. And then to the right we see a much larger canvas that we got to work with the high school, with older young people, and a bigger community of people at a high school, so you can do more, and lots of other teachers who are actively interested in involving their students in learning outdoors. So whether it's whatever the faculty. And so we were invited actually by a teacher from Monkland School, Debbie, surname escapes you now, but I met Debbie about 3 years ago. She was already gardening with the students. They had a new principal there, Ben Ryan, and they were really keen to expand the garden program.
And so that's up in Gympie. So if anyone doesn't know, Monkland State School's up in Gympie. So that's our first school in Queensland.
Yeah, so it's really exciting because it represents the new, the Cringilla School for southeast, the Sunshine Coast and Gympie region. And what we're hoping to do, what we are doing, is working with them to set up a demonstration of the model that we can inspire other schools to do the same, so people can come and see, what is it, how does it work, and talk to the kids and parents and teachers. Look, we're a practice-based program, so we focus on building the capacity of young people to do the practices in the garden. So the garden is a classroom. It's just like if you walked into a normal classroom. It's got heaps of stuff in it. It's got things where they need to be and things need to be used how they need to be used. And the teachers generally look after that, and students as well. So in the outdoor classroom we have rooms, we have practices, we have roles and responsibilities. All of that knowledge and needs to lie with the kids. Yeah.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about why our program, I guess, is different to maybe just a normal gardening program that someone sets up a garden in a school. And we feel it's very much about a solution-based approach. So as you can see there, that's the Principal Ryan from Monkland State School. His comment was about attendance. They were struggling to get a lot of kids to school. And after having our program there, his comment was that Friday's the favourite day of the week. Kids love being there because we're giving them something that the normal classroom can't or doesn't. You know, the kids themselves are saying it's the day that they look forward to. They get to design things. So basically, I think why it's a solution-based approach, or what we want to say about that, is it allows kids to make mistakes. It allows them to get out there. There's no grading. We're not sitting there giving them tests and marks and saying, you can't do this, you don't know how to do this. We're saying, hey, how do you think you might want to do this? What's your ideas? Let's give it a go. We can give this a go and you can fail. Oh, why didn't that work? Well, let's try something else. And it's about critical thinking. It's about working together. It's about working to their strengths. So you're going to have kids in schools who just are not made to sit down and just pay attention to a teacher for 40 minutes. They want to move. They're kinesthetic learners. They're physical people. They have energy. They want to get around. They want to get dirty. They want to talk to each other. You know, in school you have to sit down. You're not allowed to talk. You know, you have to concentrate. There are different ways of learning. Some kids can learn like that. That's great. But we found that by giving kids so many different ways of doing things, they really can work to their strength, and they get a lot of success by coming to school. And I just wanted to give a little anecdotal sort of story there. It's like, how many times have you heard kids sort of saying, well, why do I have to learn this? This is maths. I'm never going to use this when I grow up. What we can do by giving them a space in the garden, or our living classroom in the garden, is we give them a chance to apply this theory that they've learnt in school and actually use it. And then you get a lot of these aha moments where kids go, oh, now I understand. Now I understand what the teacher's talking about because I've seen it actually happen. I can draw a circle now, or I can understand how to draw an oval and it's actually worked, or how to make a circumference of something, or, you know, how does this fit to this, or how does this work with this, or how do I work with other people? So we're giving them a lot of reason to come to school, and we're giving them something to engage with. So we can go to the next slide. And also we're giving them some direct action, and I think Lada actually mentioned this a little bit earlier about sort of what's in the news these days. There's so much sort of stuff that can feel really heavy for kids, and we can give them a living classroom or something out in the garden. We give them real solutions. We give them an opportunity to actually be part of the solution. This quote up here is one of our students was at the school strike recently in Brisbane, or actually on the Sunshine Coast, wasn't it? Yeah. And his comment was, it's really good to see everyone here. Everyone's, you know, it's passionate and that's really exciting. But he said, no one's talking about the solutions. They don't know, what can we do? He wanted solutions, and that's what everyone wants. We want solutions. So if we can give kids, you know, a reason to be part of that solution by saying, you know, yeah, we're in drought. Well, look, we can show you how to harvest water. We can talk about ways of keeping water in your soil and allowing you to grow your food. They feel really energized. They go home and they tell their family that, and they go, oh, you know, they come back to us and they go, oh, we built a swale. You know, I got my dad and we dug one, and you know, now we know we're just waiting for the rain because we know it's going to capture that water. And they're just really positive. They're a lot more positive about life. If you're given a solution, you can be a lot more positive. Yeah, I think.
So I'm a teacher, and I remember the first time I was a prac student, and I went to see my mentor, who was supposed to be looking after me for the next couple of months. I said, "Oh, what are some tips and tricks, you know, you can do in the garden, in the classroom, you know, for behaviour and stuff?" He goes, "Well, first of all, you got to break their will. Once you've broken their will, you can control them, you can confine them, and you can implement authority. You need uniformity. I want those rows, I want those columns, and you'll be able to see if one kid's head is out of line, bang, you got him." I'm just like, whew, that sounds a bit too harsh. And I started to think, well, when I'm doing that in the classroom, it's not working. I'm getting more behavioural issues. And I had a look on the internet. I just said, like, oh, what's wrong with the education system? And I just saw article after article after article about what's wrong with the Australian education system. And it's, you know, the Australian education system's going backwards. We're not teaching them life skills. NAP plan's a big flop. The Australian education is an industrial school model. If anyone's ever heard of Fordism, where it's just like basically a conveyor belt, you get the kids in, you break their will, you stamp them with the education system, and then you just send them out. And they go out unprepared, not ready for the workforce. And I thought to myself, what does that look like? And if you press the next button, that's the classroom that I was working in. And just yesterday, I had my living classroom students. I had my living classroom students in class. They've all been through this system. And I said, how did that system make you feel? And these are the comments that they told me. They said, you might not be able to read it, but it says, no individuality, lack of freedom, a power imbalance, everything's divided. You're divided sometimes by sex, boys and girls schools, you're divided by age, you're divided by subject, you're divided by class, you're divided by schools, and you just feel like you're in this little box and you just get stamped along. You sit in the rows and columns. You have to ask to go to the toilet. You need everyone's permission. You have to give respect to people that don't give respect back. Basically the power imbalance again. They feel stuck inside, they feel confined, and they feel like their learning styles are not being engaged. And I thought to myself, the way that these kids, their will's being broken down, they've made to wear, all these uniforms, rows and columns. The only time that people are ever treated like that is in the military when they're on parade, or in jails when they're in cells, or if you're working in a factory. And this is the type of system that we're generating, these type of kids that are coming out with no critical thinking skills. And so what we thought would be the best way to do the living classroom is to use the garden as the core project and the core classroom that all the subjects, Wayne, that all the subjects of the curriculum can be applied to. We do English, we do maths, we do history, we do geography, we do science, we do biology, we do arts, we make up songs. I can sing one for you if you want. Have you ever heard, these are a few of my favourite things? We make this thing called the magic potion. It's a beautiful organic fertilizer, and we changed the lyrics, and it goes something like this. A bucket of water that's swirling with seaweed. The wormweed is awful but makes every tree green. A dash of some basalt and clay for some zing. These are a few of our favourite things. It goes on, but you get the drift. So we've got project-based learning where they can learn all those different subjects, and I teach them about assonance and alliteration because they help me make that song. So there's so many things that they can do to learn. We can make songs to retain information. And it's found that when kids are having fun, they retain information 10 times faster as opposed to rote learning and being blasted at by a teacher from the front of the classroom. So not only do project-based learning, but using that, we can go to the next one. Using that core garden as the central point of our garden, we also have learning styles. So kids have different ways of learning. Not every kid learns the same way. And so once we look at all the different learning styles, we've got kinesthetic learners, we've got visual learners, we've got audio learners, we've got kids that need to learn through interactions with each other. There's so many different ways. And when I took photos of the living classroom just over like a one-day period, have a look at the photos, we were engaging all of those learners just within a single session. They may have been at different schools and in different classes and whatnot, but in one day, all those kids were actually learning something within that classroom. And the beautiful thing is, once you've got that garden as the core project-based learning central component of the program, those kids can just orbit around the garden, and they'll just find the activity that applies to them, and they'll sit down, and some of our biggest bullies are our Star Garden ambassadors, because they're finally being spoken to and they're finally being heard. The next one. So what happens when we put all those things together? And we got the core project-based learning centre with the subjects that go around it, and then the learning styles that orbit around that. And then finally, Wayne, are you ready?
All right, in 3, 2, 1, go!
David,
Here comes the last sparrows.
and what do you guys do?
You put all your bunches in the middle.
You gotta get us out again.
Everyone dance and do the floss.
What's up, a plum?
Jabba-to-gab. Let's have a look at put everything in the middle, nice and tight together. Squeeze it all in.
That's the last of the soil! What have you got?
Beta broken bar.
And they're all having an absolute ball in that garden, and they all want to come back the next day. And so once we've got that established in different types of schools, imagine if we have it in a prep garden or in a prep school, and then it goes on to a primary school, and then it goes on to a high school, and then it goes into employment. We're creating a permaculture pathway similar to the model that we have in the Illawarra. Kids going from all the way from prep school all the way through primary school, they're actually choosing schools with living classrooms in them because they want to continue the knowledge that they're learning, and they're going out into the workforce with the life skills that they've learnt throughout that time as well. And a lot of the kids are actually choosing to be facilitators and choosing to be teachers in the living classroom to teach the younger generations again. So we'll move on to the next slide.
So one big, I guess, aspect of what we do is the practical life skills that we teach kids. So touching on what I said before, you learn theory in the classroom, but then you can get outside and actually put that theory into practice. But it's not just that, it's the really essential life skills like cooking, preparing your own food, growing your own food. Food security is a really big issue for society going forward now, and to be able to sort of say that children understand where their food comes from, where they can walk through a garden and run their hand through the trees and the plants growing and know that in 10 minutes time they're going to pick that and eat it. That is a really sort of a sense of achievement for them. So the cooking aspect of it, we put that through there because it really is about, it's great. And again, I think, Lada, you mentioned it about having the demonstrations of all these plants that we grow, but how do we use them? So being able to teach kids that, yeah, this is what we're growing, how do we use that in interesting and good ways? We have so many kids that go, oh, no, I'm not going to eat pumpkin. And then I'll put that in a scone or something like that, or a soup. And because they've seen it grow, they've picked it themselves, they've prepared it, they've understood how to make it, then they try it, and you just see them going, yeah, okay, I actually do like this. It's not cool to say I don't like green, or I don't like pumpkins, or I don't like vegetables. And so they get really excited about that. So, I mean, those photos kind of speak for themselves. It's about sharing that love of nourishing themselves, like being able to say, I understand that the food I've grown organically without, the use of pesticides or chemical fertilizers, picking it fresh and knowing that I can eat it is going to give me energy. So, they're going to look at their, we've started at the beginning of the year in a school, and you look at the kids' lunch boxes at lunchtime, and to be honest, they can be pretty dismal. They're completely packaged foods. There's really nothing vibrant in there. And the kids aren't excited about eating lunch. But then after spending some time with us in the garden, they come to us and they're like, Vanessa, Dan, Aaron, look what I've got in my lunchbox. And they're so proud. It's like, I've packed my lunchbox today. We have so many of them telling us. And they've put fruit in there. There's colour in there. There's real food in, there's real food in there. And it's just about, giving them that energy to sort of go, yeah, I want this, I like this. Anything else I wanted to say? I think just before we go into that, I just wanted to give you another little anecdote where it's also food, and what we do in the garden is about connection. And you might have seen one of the photos up there was one of the grandfathers of one of the kids who'd come and visited the garden, and that's what we do, we invite the community in. And he sat down and he spoke with the kids, and all of them were so engaged. He was telling the story about when he was growing up in Hungary, how he had to know how to grow food or they would have starved. And it was that life skill for him that was able to be able to mean that, he was able to get through life. And so one of the little it's one of those like beautiful moments for me that I wanted to share with you is that we grew broad beans, I think, sort of beginning of this year, was it? Anyway, we grew broad beans and we harvested them. A lot of the kids had never come across a broad bean, didn't know what to do with them. But we had to shelve them. So we'd gather them all off the plants, and I took the kitchen class up, and we sat around and we had busy hands. So we were just sitting there in a sort of circle, shelling peas, or shelling broad beans, and it was just this beautiful moment of this sort of slow food movement where they're busy hands and they just started chatting. I wasn't saying to them, you need to talk about this. I wasn't leading any questions. It was just this beautiful coming together of these kids, having a really genuine chat around the food, like we used to do. Like it's what I used to do when I was growing up with my grandmother. we'd shell peas around the table or prepare the food after going out into the garden. So it's just about bringing back that sort of traditional way of being and being with each other in a natural way. There was no teacher there going, oh, I've got to assess what they're saying, I've got to know if they know how to count maths or whatever. It was just this beautiful moment, and we get so much of those moments out in the garden. So that sort of leads, I guess, onto the ambassador topic that we wanted to talk about.
Look, just to sort of really wrap it up in a nutshell for you, that our garden program works because we have this ambassador program. It works because we work with young people regularly, and the same group of young people, we invest in them. So a typical school will have a group of ambassadors that go to the garden every fortnight for a full day. They're released from class and they're in the garden. They're an ambassador for the full day. They do that for a full year. The next year we take a new group. We start a new group, but we hold on to some of those students who want to keep being ambassadors. So after 3 years, what we've realised is that after 3 years of doing this, the culture starts to change, and you have community development happening. And so in addition to all of the great outcomes of the program, just in terms of learning, there's a shift in culture. And that's, as permaculturalists, that's the ultimate outcome. We also see that after a few years that we're not actually needed anymore, that there's a teacher in the school, or there's the capacity for the program to stand alone, and that's our ultimate goal. We're not needed, because we want to have this program in every school around the country, and so we can't do that on our own, and it comes back to what we talked about at the beginning. It's partnership. We wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for many, many other people from different sectors of society. For us to move this program forward, it's not money that we need, it's friendships, it's cooperation, it's partnership, it's to do it. And why are we doing? Because we want to change the culture, and we want to we want to change the world, one school at a time, I guess. So yeah.
But yeah, the first. So some of the feedback that we've got from some teachers, from some parents, and some kids. This is one that we got from one of our students. His mother said that, thank you so much for what you've done to us, for our son. He was so down and depressed, but now when he goes home, he jumps straight into the garden, and now he wants to go off to do a permaculture course and start changing the world in every place that he goes. And that was someone who was extremely depressed, and he'd lost a lot of the colour in his face. He didn't have much hope for the future, and once he started acting in the solutions, bang, he was on like a light switch, and his parents couldn't stop him. He was wheelbarrows and shovels, and he was starting his own garden. The next feedback that we got, I just got yesterday and last week. This woman's daughter has a severe case of Tourette's, and whenever she gets extremely anxious, she has very large outbursts. And she said that she came, the first day that she came to the living classroom, she was there for the whole day in a new environment that normally causes her anxiety, and she did not tick once. Now, this is a girl who has 2 seizures usually in the morning and 2 in the evening, and the whole day she was completely fine after playing with the goats, playing with the chickens, being in the garden. And then next week, she said, actually, my daughter, this week, she had a couple of small outbursts. But it was only when we were talking about the traditional school, the industrial school system, like the quotes that I showed you, she was part of that lesson. She only started to tick when she started to think back to traditional education. And for that for me was, I'm a teacher, and I'm never going back to that traditional education system again. I just can't do it. It's not in my heart. And the final piece of feedback that we got was from a teacher when we were at Monkland State School, and she said that she's been a teacher for over 30 years, and she's taught in the Sunshine Coast in every single school at least twice within her time, and she's never seen a program like the Living Classroom, and she says it's absolutely fantastic. It's chaos, as you may have heard, and I see how teachers would be afraid by that chaos, but it's chaos that's working. And it's engaging all the students, and it needs to be everywhere. And that kind of gets us to our last point on our slide, is that what we're trying to do is teachers like myself and teachers like Vanessa and landscape architects like Dan, we're all teachers, we're all facilitators. We understand that this needs to be in schools everywhere. And what we want to do is we want to create a permaculture partnership like we have done with Permaculture Noosa tonight. We want to create a partnership not just with businesses, organisations and communities, but also individuals, because we're 3 people and we can get to all these schools, but there's so much that happens in those interims of reaching out to those schools. I mean, just in this room here, we have the people and the power and the 6 degrees of separation to connect with all the schools within the Sunshine Coast and be a leading example of bringing up these amazing garden ambassadors and sending out these amazing sustainably minded kids out into the world. And so, I like that graphic. The two just meld so well together. So we're looking to create partnerships with businesses, organisations, communities, individuals, and schools within the Sunshine Coast area, so we can start to grow it out and start to have a permaculture partnership that is completely sustainable and all over the schools in the Sunshine Coast. But it's also about creating a pathway for kids. This is one of the most important things. We've got the garden ambassadors, but getting those garden ambassadors from as young as the age of 5 through to primary school, then through to high school, and then out into employment where they can then go back and they can teach the younger generation. And that's something that we really hold dear in our hearts, and we want the permaculture principles and the regenerative agriculture ethics embossed on the hearts of our living classroom ambassadors, so they can go out into the world and make a really, really positive change for the future. Thank you very much, guys.